Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another installment in my Elizabeth Gaskell project for you. We will be looking at the Moorland Cottage from 1850. So, how is this going to work? I will begin with a bit of history of both Gaskell and the novel, or novella, I should say, it's a novella. Building off of the history that I started in my video on Mary Barton. So, won't be covering all of Gaskell's life, just kind of what was going on at the time the Moorland Cottage was published. I will then give a brief summary of the book before moving into the major themes that I noticed and ending with my thoughts on it as a book. Please do be noted there will be spoilers, so if you do not want to know what happens in the Moorland Cottage, you should not watch this video. You should go pick it up, it's very short, and then you should come back and watch this video after you've read it. So, let's jump in. So, in the time between Mary Barton being published and the Moorland Cottage being published, Gaskell published a few more short stories. She met Dickens for the first time. In 1850, her and her family moved to Manchester into their house on Plymouth Grove, which is now a museum that I have yet to go to despite living in Lancashire for an entire year. Someday I'll get there. Gaskell also met Charlotte Bronte in 1850, who would become a good friend of hers and who she would write the biography of after Bronte's death. And she was also invited by Dickens to contribute to Household Words, and she published several short stories, including Lizzie Lee. Moorland Cottage apparently was supposed to be a Christmas story, which does not mean a story about Christmas, it means a story that came out at Christmas. Her and her publisher had a lot of disagreements about it, but it was eventually published in 1850 in one volume by Chapman and Hall. This is the story of Maggie Brown, a young girl who lives with her widowed mother and her brother in a very secluded cottage on the moor. Maggie is kind of terrorized by her older brother Edward, even though she loves him very, very much. But he's awful. He's horrible. They begin to become intimate with the Buxton family, the father, Mr. Buxton, had been a friend of Maggie's father. So she begins spending time with the son, Frank, and his cousin, Ermina, who lives with them, as well as Mrs. Buxton, who is an invalid, but who really takes to Maggie and is really teaching her morality. They grow up. Mrs. Buxton passes away. Frank and Maggie end up falling in love. Mr. Buxton is opposed to the marriage because Maggie is poor and he wanted better things for his son, basically. Edward is a hot mess, getting himself into debt, bullying his mother for money, and finally he forges Mr. Buxton's name on a check, leading to him being pursued by the police. So he comes to Maggie. Mr. Buxton finds out he's there and tries to make Maggie give up her engagement to Frank as kind of like in exchange for letting Edward go free. Maggie refuses to do that because she thinks that is immoral and not fair to Frank. They do devise a plan for Edward to go, I believe, to America, and Maggie will accompany him for a year to make sure that he does not get into any trouble. Of course, the ship that they are on gets set on fire, and in the chaos, Edward is drowned. But Maggie is rescued by Frank, who had gotten aboard the ship in pursuit of her after receiving a letter saying that she was going to America with her brother. So it ends with them getting married and living together like happily ever after kind of, but also her mother's very sad about Edward's death still because that was her favorite child. But he kind of sucked, so. The story apparently inspired George Eliot's The Mill on the Floss. You can very much see that with the relationship between Maggie and Edward. It's a very similar relationship to the relationship between Maggie Tulliver and her brother Tom in The Mill on the Floss, with Tom being awful and kind of being a tyrant over her. But the ending is much more satisfying in the Moorland Cottage than in The Mill on the Floss. So that is what this book is about. What are some of the major themes? So the biggest theme is that of the position of women and gender roles in the 19th century. And like many of Gaskell's books, she plays out this kind of big societal problem on a small personal scale. So we see this issue through the relationship between Maggie and Edward. So at the beginning, when they are children, he says to her, "You see, Maggie, a man must be educated to be a gentleman. Now, if a woman knows how to keep a house, that's all that is wanted from her. So my time is of more consequence than yours." And he uses this kind of excuse of my time is like more important to get her to do things for him. And then shortly thereafter, Maggie is saying to herself, "I wish I could help being clumsy and stupid. Ned says all women are so. I wish I was not a woman. It must be a fine thing to be a man." As they get older and Maggie learns more about morality from Mrs. Buxton, she stops being as obedient to all of Edward's wishes and will only do something if she believes it is right. This makes him angry, and he says, "You must always have a reason for everything now. You are not half so nice as you were. Unless one chops logic with you and convinces you by a long argument, you'll do nothing. Be obedient, I tell you. That is what a woman has to be." And then at the end of the novel, when we have this conflict of Mr. Buxton has said, "Give up your engagement with Frank and I will let Edward go free." Edward is like, "Well, give up your engagement for me." It's like, doesn't see any problem. He says to his mother, "I'll make her give up all thoughts of Frank rather than be taken and tried. Why, it's my chance for all my life. And do you think I'll have it frustrated for a girl's whim?" He sucks. He's awful. I hate him. But that's the point. You're supposed to be like, wow, you're terrible. And this idea that a man's time and future is more important than a woman's is terrible. So we also have a big theme of morality in this book, because Maggie is always trying to do what is right based on the teachings of Mrs. Buxton. When Edward's back from school, Maggie fell into her old humble way of submitting to his will, as long as it did not go against her conscience. But that, being daily enlightened by her habits of pious aspiring thought, would not allow her to be so utterly obedient as formerly. She tells him, "I will do anything, Ned, that is right." And then this also comes up when in her engagement to Frank, because Frank wants to kind of go away from England and go to one of the colonies because he thinks that England is too corrupt. Like, there's nothing that can be done here. There's too many evils. And she says to him, "But cannot you bravely face these evils and learn their nature and causes? And then has God given you no powers to apply to the discovery of their remedy? Dear Frank, think. It may be very little you can do, and you may never see the effect of it, any more than the widow saw the worldwide effect of her mite. Then, if all the good and thoughtful men run away from us to some new country, what are we to do with our poor dear old England?" The idea that the people who are doing right need to kind of stay and do what they can to better the country, even though it's small and you'll probably never see the effect, but it's the right thing to do. And at the end, when she's sitting on the ship before it, sets on fire, She says, I was right to hope for Edward. I am right to give him the chance of steadiness which my presence will give. I am doing what my mother earnestly wished me to do, and what to the last she felt relieved by my doing. I know Frank will feel sorrow, because I myself have such an aching heart. But if I had asked him whether I was not right in going, he would have been too truthful not to have said yes. I have tried to do right, and though I may fail, evil may seem to arise rather than good out of my endeavor, yet still I will submit to my failure and try and say God's will be done. So again, she is always trying to do right. And then the final theme I want to briefly talk about is money as corrupting. We see this with Edward, hot mess of a boy, falling into debt and forging checks. The more he is in society, because he goes to London as an apprentice lawyer, I think. So the more he is in London and under this kind of corrupting influence of needing to spend money to look the part and act the part and all that, the worse he gets. Until at the end, I mean, he is ill and just unwell. But we also have Frank talk about it quite a bit, because his father kind of becomes obsessed with money after the death of Mrs. Buxton, and is constantly taking people to court for not paying the rent or trying to cheat him out of things under the influence of this agent, Mr. Henry. And Frank says, good God, that money should have such power to corrupt men. It was all for money and money's worth that this degradation has taken place. As for Mr. Henry, to save his client money and to protect money, he does not care. He does not even perceive how he induces deterioration of character. He has been encouraging my father in measures which I cannot call anything but vindictive. Crayston, one of the people that is being sued, is to be made an example of, they say, as if my father had not half the sin on his own head, as if he had rightly discharged his duties as a rich man. Money was as dross to him, but he ought to have remembered how it might be life itself to many, and be craved after and coveted, till the black longing got the better of principle, as it has done with this poor Crayston. They say the man was once so truthful, and now his self-respect is gone, and he has evidently lost the very nature of truth. I dread riches. I dread the responsibility of them. At any rate, I wish I had begun life as a poor boy and worked my way up to competence. Then I could understand and remember the temptations of poverty. I am afraid of my own heart becoming hardened as my father's is. This is a minor theme in comparison to the position of women, but it is very much there. So that is all that I wanted to talk about for major themes. This is obviously a very short book, as you can see. So there is a lot less to talk about than a 300-page, 400-page book like Mary Barton. So, what are my thoughts? This was lovely. It was delightful. I liked Maggie. I liked her relationship with Frank. I liked hating on Edward, because I love having a character to hate. Really what I wanted was for it to be longer. I wanted to see these themes more fleshed out, and I wanted to spend more time in some of these moments, particularly toward the end, with Maggie trying to kind of bargain for Edward's freedom and the toll it's taking on her to have to decide whether to give up Frank or her brother. And then more time with her decision to leave England with him. I did feel that the final few chapters in which the fire happens and all this, it was just a sudden rush of action, whereas everything else had been very slow. I would have liked more time, just more time spent with all of that. Because it was kind of all of a sudden the ship's on fire and then it's over and were jumping off the ship into the water, and I was like, what? So yeah, I don't know. I wanted more from it, I guess. I did like it very much though. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a very sweet story, and it has a much better ending than The Mill on the Floss. Because people get what they deserve. That probably sounds awful, but hey, you know, I like that Maggie gets a happily ever after with Frank. I like that. So, yeah. Like I said, it's good. I'd recommend it. 4 stars. It's just not quite as in-depth as her other novels. So, that is The Moorland Cottage. Next month, we will be looking at Ruth from 1853, I want to say, although that might be completely wrong. I don't know. Ruth will be a reread for me. And I am hopefully buddy reading it with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. And I'm very much looking forward to rereading it. Let me know down in the comments, have you read The Moorland Cottage? What did you think of it? Do you agree with me, disagree with me on some of the major themes? What did you notice about it? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.